In chapter 11, there are two very different kinds of ghosts. There's the ghost of a mother who is unhappy about the loss of her son, and she's come to heaven looking for her son. And there's a ghost who is a man with this lizard wrapped around him that evidently is the very embodiment of some kind of lustful habit that he has. Two very different ghosts, and yet the reason they're in the same chapter is because Lewis uses this to contrast two different forms of disordered love. The mother has a very difficult time breaking away from the disordered love that she has, and we don't know that she is able to do so. The other ghost, the male ghost, ends happily. He ends up being able to break away from this disordered love. For the sake of filling out a little bit what's happening here in this chapter in Lewis's discussion of love, I'd like to talk a little bit about a book of his called The Four Loves. Lewis draws these four loves from four Greek terms that describe different aspects of love. We tend to use the word love for all sorts of different things, but the Greeks had four distinct terms: storge, philia, eros, and agape. Storge was affection, the love that exists within family or can exist within long-term acquaintances. Philia, friendship love, your pals, your buddies, best friends forever. Eros, which is romantic or sexual love. When you talk about lovers, you mean eros. And then finally, agape, sacrificial love, the love that we describe as charity, a love for God and love for neighbor in God. Friendship is not criticized in the Great Divorce, but storge, that is affection love, and eros, romantic or sexual love, ends up being criticized, and these both in this chapter. There are two important points that he makes in his discussion of love there which apply here. First is that no natural love is good on its own, that it needs to be purified. He quotes a French writer, de Rougemont, who says that love will cease to be a demon only when it ceases to be a god. It's a mistake to think that somehow any one of our natural loves, just on its own, is good in itself. He explains this in Mere Christianity specifically about mother love, that people will think that somehow mother love and patriotism, these are good, and somehow our sexual desire or our desire to fight, our desire for aggression, that these are somehow bad. But in fact, there are times when we need our instinct for self-defense. We need our desires for intimacy. It may be that these are things that need to be restrained more often than mother love or patriotism. But these are not things that are bad in themselves. They simply need to be governed. Likewise, mother love and patriotism are not things that are good in themselves. Mother love is something that can be excessive. It can be out of control. And that's what we're seeing with this character of Pam. Her mother love is something that is no longer governed by any kind of higher love. When she speaks with the bright person, when she speaks with this spirit who evidently is her brother, her whole understanding is that God is a means to getting her son back. And he keeps trying to help her understand that if she's going to be in a condition to get back to her son and to encounter her son, she needs to be thickened up. And that thickening process means that she needs to love something else besides her son. She needs to start loving God. If love, whether it's a sexual love, a romantic love, a maternal love, if that love is broken off from a higher love, namely for God, for respect for goodness, for a moral law, then that love becomes disordered and turns in on itself, becomes distorted. The second point that Lewis makes from the four loves that would be helpful here is to recognize that the higher a kind of love is, the more dangerous it is, because it can be confused with the highest loves. The ghost who has this lizard that evidently represents some kind of disordered sexual desire, he is not going to think that that's something high or holy or noble or beautiful. If anything, he knows he's under the control of something bestial, something lower than himself. That's why it's expressed as this animal. Whereas Pam, the mother, can believe that her love for her son is the highest and holiest of loves, even though, in fact, her love needs to be ordered by something higher to truly be a real love, even a real mother love. Notice that she's willing to take her son to hell rather than reorient her own loves. She thinks that somehow she and her son would be happy in hell together if they just had each other, when in fact, of course, they would be miserable. So the higher a love is does not necessarily mean that this is a love that is less likely to lead a person into sin. If anything, the higher love is, the more that a person can idolize it, can turn it into something much grander and much more important than it really is in reality. In the next chapter, we'll look at the beginning of a narrative section where MacDonald and Lewis are overhearing a discussion between a husband who's come up from hell and his wife, who is one of the bright spirits in heaven, and her attempt to persuade her husband to give up his particular vice and stay with her in heaven.